Welcome, 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 good people. Happy Friday. We made it through another week, y'all. And welcome to Black Women. I don't even know the name. Black Women Are Dope AF, which is my weekly live series to bring to you the untold stories of incredible Black women who have done incredible things to help us move forward, to shine their lights, and to show us just how dope Black women are. Today, we are talking about and honoring Nana Asma'u, whose intellectual dopeness is just so profound as a scholar who uplifted generations of West African women in the 1800s, who was woke before woke was awoke, and who championed women's education before it was even looked at and considered in the West. And I present her and I present all of the women that we honor every Friday here. We shifted the time to 6 p.m., but I honor her so that Black women today can remember just how dope we are. We need to reach back and reclaim the history and the wisdom and the lessons and the medicine that came before us so that we can claim it in the now and remember who we are. So with that, like, subscribe, hit the buttons, and we're going to get into it with no delay. So let's bring up a little bit more. So Nana Asma'u, again, that intellectual dopeness. Uh, she was born in 1893 in an area that is in what's now northern Nigeria, and she was born into a family of Fulani Islamic reformers and educators in the heart, and they were at the heart of what was called the Jakoto Jihad, which was in a religious and social revolution across northern Nigeria. So what does all of that mean? So it basically means that she was pretty dope. So she was the daughter of a Fulani religious leader who led this jihad and established their nation state, Sokoto Falasad, which was the largest West African Islamic empire of the 19th century. And the reason why they had the jihad, which was an upliftment, it is not what we think about and what we hear in the media about, oh, it's just a spiritual war. It was a war and it was around spirituality, but the leaders at the time, the Hausa leaders, were blending Islamic faith with what was more of the traditional faith, and they were doing things that were just out of alignment, really, with both lines of religion, both religious practices, and they were breaking religious laws, which at that time period, what Islam was, which was different than what it is today, uh, the religious laws was really political and governmental laws. For example, they were excessively, this is going to sound real familiar, they were excessively and repeatedly and unfairly taxing the people, the citizens. They were denying women education. They were doing a lot of heinous things that were basically benefiting the very few and elite, but not for the people the way the true Islamic faith in that time period was meant to. And so her father was a key part of that, and her family was a key part of that. Um, Her mother was also a scholar, because understand, again, in the traditional Islamic culture, learning and scholarship and reading and literacy and really understanding the world and understanding history was sacred. It wasn't just a thing to do and a thing that was reserved for the elite. It was a sacred part of your spirituality. And so she grew up in a household that valued intellectual endeavors and valued spiritual rigor and the both. And she had many siblings. That was a culture where her father was able to have multiple wives, but her mother was his most trusted wife. And she did have several siblings by both parents, by her mother, but it was her brother who actually rose to lead the nation state that was created after the jihad. So they were very close. And just as her father relied on her and her mother to bring their insight and influence and insight to the work that he was doing, so did her brother. And again, this reformist movement was rooted in values like justice, anti corruption, gender equality in education and spiritual discipline. All the things that we can see very clearly are missing in today's world, but these are the things that her father went to war for because the leaders were not upholding it. The leaders at the time were not embracing it, and they were doing the people dirty. And her father said, no, no, we're not doing that anymore. And she supported him. That whole family supported that effort. So when we think about she also was raised, as I mentioned, in this deeply Islamic intellectual environment. So she was multilingual. She spoke about, I think, 3 or 4 languages, and those languages were not, this was nothing about European languages. These are all the languages that were spoken in that region. But as a multilingual scholar, poet, and teacher, she did all of this by her early 20s. So again, her education, her scholarship started in the household. And I've said this many times throughout this series and the series before this with honoring our ancestors. As a mother is educated, as a mother's principles and values are amplified, that's passed down to the children. So that is usually the flow um, of the educational prowess and the educational achievements that a child has made have come through the mother's line because the mother is the first teacher in the household. That kind of starts in the womb and then it continues. So her mother raised her up in this way. So by the time she was in her early 20s, multilingual scholar, poet, teacher, she was all the things. Now, again, this family tradition of intellectual prowess and Islamic learning, and it was viewed as sacred, and how they looked at the work that they did and what they were eventually to build was in the legacy of what you may have heard of before, Timbuktu. So Timbuktu was located in what's present day Mali, and it was an epicenter again of Islamic education and scholarship in West Africa, and was the home of over 700,000 manuscripts. I mean, this was the center of knowledge and wisdom, Timbuktu. And although by the time her family was in place and starting to do their work, Timbuktu had declined politically for various reasons, invasions and pressures from the outside, all these things. But its educational model had lasted and endured the test of time. And so when her family and the others that were a part of that jihad created this new environment and created the new center that would eventually become the new version of a Timbuktu. They looked to Timbuktu to understand what they had done and how they had done it and to continue that legacy. So it wasn't at all a competition thing, but it was, we're moving this forward. And that is the way progress works, right? Once one um, system reaches its peak and declines, another one takes its place or continues the work and elevates it even further. That is how progress is made, unlike what we see happening in the world today here in 2025. But, and so her household really honored that legacy and continued to honor what in that time period in the Islamic faith, the idea of study, of reading, of learning multiple languages, of learning about the world was key and sacred. It was not almost, it was your sacred duty to be a scholar, to learn, to read, to do all these things. And no one was removed from that. No one as, was excluded from that. Women and men. It was imperative that women and men were able to pursue education. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that came to change later on. I'm gonna let y'all guess what you think it might have been, who you think might have came in and influenced the culture in such a way that removed or separated or excluded women from education. I'm gonna let you, marinate on that for a minute. And let me take a step back. At this time that all of this was happening, that Nana Asma'u was born and raised, the area had not been colonized yet. That'll give you a hint. So let's continue. And so she founded what was called the Yantaru, I'm sorry. She founded the Yantaru, which was a revolutionary women's literary movement. And she trained female educators to reach and teach rural and urban women across the empire. Now, again, part of the traditional Islamic faith of that time period is a deep reverence for education, a deep reverence for scholarship for everyone, no one excluded, men and women. But in this area, which is why they had the jihad, they weren't following traditional Islamic law. They weren't following Sharia law. They were combining and doing other things. And so a lot of women had been taken away from education, or were in rural areas and didn't have access to it, or the education was reserved only for the aristocrats. And again, this was still before colonization, so things had started to seep in before the British came. But again, we'll talk about, I'm already giving it away, that the British really accelerated that even further. But in founding that Yan Taru and this literary movement, it was a network of female scholars and educators. And they traveled to rural communities all over the empire, teaching women literacy, teaching them spiritual practice, teaching them hygiene, and educating them and uplifting them through poetry, mentorship, and these mobile teaching networks across the caliphate. So understand how groundbreaking that was. We can't figure out how to do that now. We can't figure out how to go into areas, to go into communities and educate our people in this very decentralized and yet centralized way, where there's a combination of both. And so it was groundbreaking, and it was state supported, meaning that when her father was leading, and then when that leadership transitioned over to her brother, she got resources to help her to do that. She was able to recruit people. She had the resources to write and to create the works, the bodies of work that were actually used to educate people in the rural areas. And she blended oral tradition with Islamic knowledge, and she made learning accessible to everyone. So it wasn't just this highbrow language. And again, she knew multiple language, and she wrote in multiple languages. So it wasn't just that, but she found a way to make this relevant to everyone, including those rural women who were not accustomed to that, who hadn't been exposed to that. And she emphasized that women had the right and the obligation to learn. Period. Dot. I'm gonna just pause right there. Women had the right and the obligation to learn. And she used Islamic teachings to justify the spiritual equality. And to be clear, the poetic works that she created, that she wrote, were used as educational texts. The women that she trained to go out into the communities to educate other women were trained on the texts that she wrote. People from across the empire, men and women, aristocrats and other scholars, referred to the texts that she wrote as educational foundation. So that she basically wrote her own textbooks. And so when you think about the fact that her poetic works were used as tools of resistance. Now, the colonialism hadn't happened yet, but because of the education that she instilled, uh, she combated the ignorance that was taking place, or that had taken a hold, so that people were more prepared when the colonizers did come, especially women. And she continued to work all throughout all throughout the upheavals and the wars, and because life was not easy. And she wrote more than 60 major texts. And understand, we're not talking about little blips. We're talking about texts that covered everything that women, really people, but particularly women, needed to know. Scholarship, education. She educated her people. And then what we really understand about her is that her story is so powerful because she dismantled these myths that we have now about what Islam is about regarding gender. And she proved that African Muslim women are and still were and still are central to society, culture, and governance, and education. Central to all of that. Her legacy matters then, and it still resonates because she proved that we could both be devout and radical. We can be rooted in faith and revolutionary at the same time. Now, she really focused on a world that or undoing the world that separated intellect and spirit and bringing those together and bringing marginalized women back into the faith to truly teach them. Because how can we expect them? Because understand, in her view of what it meant to live and what it meant to be aligned with Allah, what it meant to follow the teachings of Muhammad, how can they do that if they weren't aware of what it was, if they weren't aware of how they were supposed to be living, how they were supposed to be taking care of themselves, how they were supposed to be learning and cherishing the fact that they learned or being able to learn? How can they be held accountable for that if they didn't know? And to help these women, in her mind, to elevate and to be in alignment with spirituality, they needed to be educated so that they can continue to go forth and educate their children and educate their families and their communities. And I'm talking about not only the people, the women that she educated to be teachers, but the women that they then went out and educated. It was a continuous cycle. If you educate the women, you educate the community and the household and the family. Understand that. And so, again, this was long before the British colonization disrupted these systems. Her and her family built this self-sustaining, um, deliberate, ethical society that was led by both men and women. Men and women. And her work transcended class, geography, gender, social status, all of that. She was about educating the people so that they would be in alignment with the teachings and with what true Islam was about. So, but exactly why? Why is she dope as fuck? She definitely is. And so are you. Black women are dope as fuck even now. And all of the women that we're talking about in this time, in this series, Black Women Are Dope as Fuck, are here to remind us of that, to remind us of qualities that exist in every last one of us. But why is she in particular dope? Well, she was one of the most prolific and respected Islamic scholars in West Africa, male or female. We're not just talking about, oh, she was the best of the women. She was one of the best, period, male or female, during that time. Her work was respected across the Islamic world, and she was consulted by male and female scholars and rulers on matters of faith and law, period. Her writings addressed ethics, education, leadership, gender, spirituality. So understand, she wrote these 60 major works or these texts. She basically created an entire university curriculum and wrote all of the textbooks. And by the way, her teachers that she trained to go out into the communities, whether it was rural or urban, that she trained, they had to memorize the poetry that she created, which were texts, which were the documents and the textbooks that they used to educate. So her teachers had to embody the wisdom and the knowledge. They had to memorize it, they had to know it, they had to live it and breathe it. And so, and in those texts, again, they were historical chronicles, they were theology, they were educational, poetry, and legal treatise. In that information, in that education that she took out into the community, um, uh, that the women that she trained took out into the community, included legalities, included an understanding of how to manage and balance in the world legally. And then she went on to create, again, this first large scale women's literacy networks, the first one in African history. The Yan Taru was a network. Again, these women who were mobilized as teachers. So when you think about what I just described in terms of the texts that Nana Asma'u wrote, the teachers that she trained, they were experts or teachers on all topics: spirituality. They were spiritual leaders, public intellectuals, and moral guides. And thinking about what they were moving out of after the jihad, the morality was super important. Being in alignment was super important. And teaching that to women ensured that it would be taught to children. But that wasn't even the reason they did it. They did it because women and men learning, being scholars, understanding the spirituality, understanding their commitments and responsibilities morally, understanding how to interact, understanding how to take care of themselves. in terms of hygiene and be in alignment with spirituality, that was everyone's responsibility, and it wasn't just sequestered to one group or another. Now, in her vision, she empowered women to lead communities, not just their families, but communities and across society. And she centered non-elite women. So it wasn't this classist system that we see playing out today in 2025. It was about everyone. It was about the masses. It was about everyone having access to wisdom, knowledge, and scholarship, and being able to grow and expand their scholarship and their wisdom on their own, or within groups like the Yantaru. She's also dope as fuck because, oops, sorry, y'all, because she embodied that Islamic leadership that was radically inclusive and spiritually liberatory. He taught that Islam requires women's education, agency, and participation in public life. So understand that. Required their participation in public life. This wasn't some women should be quiet and demure and hide yourselves and go off somewhere else and let the men do their work. She taught that women should be actively involved in the political and community aspects of life, of their society, of their empire, and that they should be educated and not silenced. And she rejected this idea that faith and feminism are and oppositional, that you can't be a woman and be completely devoted to your faith. We have this thing now in Christian churches where women are looked at in some faiths and some aspects of Christianity where women aren't supposed to be behind the pulpit. I even heard a pastor many years ago that said, oh, there's a feminization of religion. So you want women out of it? Things don't work in that way. But she rejected that and she moved forward, and she remains a symbol that of Black Muslim womanhood is not about submission or being submissive, but it's powerful, brilliant, and spiritually aligned and grounded. And then the fourth reason, because there are many, but we could be here all day. The fourth reason why she is dope as fuck is that her work planted seeds of cultural resistance that helped her people to navigate through what would be the upcoming colonial rule. And by upcoming colonial rules, um, in the early 1900s, the British colonized that area. And it's now called Nigeria. But when they came in, all of these different religions were to some extent working or living in harmony. When they came in, they created divide, they created tension, they created friction so that they could capitalize on it, and then took away all of the educational institutions that Nana Asma'u had created and their family had created, and all of those who had gone and continued after her, because she had been long gone since by the time the British came in. They dismantled all of those educational centers and locked women out so that women in that area in West Africa could no longer be educated, and then brought in Christian values and the missionary schools and education. So they did their due diligence to undo all of the work that people like Nana Asmu had done, but there was a seed already planted, which is why we're talking about her today, which is why children's books have been written about her, which is why they've kept her legacy alive despite the colonization, despite the miseducation. They've kept her legacy alive, and that seed, that core is still there, of women being the educators in our household, and the fairness and the responsibility to be educated, to read, to learn, to grow. And education, especially in modern times, doesn't necessarily mean going to the 4-year college and getting the degree in the traditional sense, but it does mean going beyond the surface. It does mean reading, learning, having a critical thinking mind, going beyond what someone just tells you and looking into the depths of it, following the breadcrumbs with curiosity so that you can learn more about the world, about yourself. Yes, it may mean taking classes. It may mean going back to school and getting that degree in something that you're interested in, because education is not just about getting trained in a thing and getting a job. Jobs are shifting and changing and moving and going to AI and going to robots eventually, all the things, but education is yours. Education is so that you can know where the world has been and who you are and how to navigate in it with full knowledge and not just relying on someone to tell you their version of the truth. Education is key, and that is what she taught, and that's the seed that she planted. And we are so thankful to Nana Asma'u for the work that she did in educating. And to be clear, we are thankful for her intellectual dopeness. All of this is why she is dope as fuck. So let's move on and talk about the wisdom that she left for us and how we can apply that as Black women in our lives today. So one of the first pieces of wisdom that I extract from her life, from her works, that comes up for me is liberation is built through literacy. If you couldn't tell, that was really important as I was going in. But liberation is built through literacy, and literacy is a sacred act. Even by and I feel uplifted and I feel expanded as I do these sessions, as I do these live streams to talk about Black women are dope as fuck, because it requires me to learn more about women and share that with you. It's liberating every time I do that, and hopefully every time you hear it and learn and go further. Don't take what I just learned here, go further, go do your due diligence, do more research. But in doing that, I'm honoring her. That alone makes it a sacred act. As we learn about Black women in our past and we learn about all of the Black women who have come before us all over the globe, those who have been removed from history in a lot of ways, it becomes a sacred act because we keep their legacy alive. We keep who they are alive. And liberation is built through that literacy. You cannot liberate yourself if you don't know. You don't know what's happening to you, or if you don't know what's been done before. Part of that of us being a liberated people, and we talked about this a lot in the ancestral activation series, especially during the week of sacred restoration. Part of us restoring and remembering who we are is decolonizing our minds, and trust and believe the degree and the nuances of how our minds have been colonized is very deep, and you have to uncover and keep uncovering and keep going through the layers. But that was the wisdom that came up for me as we talk about Nana Asma'u and the work that she has done for us, which we are so thankful. But how can we apply that today in our lives? We can make learning a sacred legacy. We can make learning a part of what we do and how we do it. It's not just about, whatever spiritual tradition that you practice, whether it's any of the African spiritual traditions, Christianity, or Islam. Learning, incorporating learning into that practice is how you can play it forward and make it not just for yourself, but for your people, for your family, and all aspects of that. Um, and what we can also do is create spaces for girls and women where we can learn our true history. We can learn from each other. That's part of what I'm doing with this series and with this channel, Beautiful, Powerful Love, which, by the way, I'm Barbara Ohuninifa. I don't even think I was so trying to jump into it, didn't even introduce myself. And on Beautiful, Powerful Love, I focus on assisting, helping, supporting Black women to remember who we are, to remember that we are beautiful, we are powerful, and we are the essence and the embodiment of love. And I do that through content like this, through books. I have 2 books. You can find them at my website, shop.beautifulpowerfullove.com. And I do that through coaching, and you can learn more about that. There's links in the bios and all the things. So that's the work that we do here, and that's work that you can do in whatever way that makes sense for you, is to create those spaces so that we can learn who we are by looking at these other women who have done things and left legacy for us to look at and reflect back to us who we actually are as well. And support this modern day Tan Yan Taru. Whatever you learn, teach it to somebody else. Again, I'm kind of practicing that here. Didn't even realize that that's what I was doing, but she showed up for me clearly to tell me, keep doing what you're doing. And then teach your gifts in public. Be bold about being a teacher or a writer or a scholar or a guide, again, in whatever way that makes sense for you, whatever your medium is, whether it's art, whether it's words, whatever, and whether it's written words, spoken words, whatever it is, do the thing that you were born here to do, sharing your knowledge. Get it out of yourself and onto the world stage. So someone else, another person, another little black girl or grown ass black woman can hear it and be inspired by it to remember who they are. And then the other piece of wisdom that she left for us is that I think is super interesting, that it came up for me, is that Islam, when it's decolonized, is a path to justice, not oppression. And oftentimes when we hear about Islam, and I am not a practicing, I do not practice Islamic faith, and I give all respect to all faiths and what people practice, um, particularly if it is not harmful to other people. And there's some weird things out there, but that has nothing to do with Islam. So, in her life, she proved that patriarchy is not Islam's root. It's become associated with it, and we don't even want sometimes even call it that, patriarchy, because some of these principles we have so integrated in our minds now with Islam that we just assume that that's what it is. But what her legacy proves is that no, 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 no. Before the colonizers came in and shifted and changed and bastardized everything, Islam was about equality and a path to righteousness, not in an oppressive way. But yes, if you, and that's any spiritual tradition, if you are not in alignment with the spiritual laws, not dictated by a man, but dictated by spirit, by source, by God, whatever you want to call it, Allah, Jehovah, Orunmila, or Oludumare, Christ, whatever you call that God, if you are not in alignment with that energy, there's going to be consequences to pay. Not because anyone is punishing you, in my belief. There are belief systems in some levels, in some sects of Christianity that do believe in punishment, but it is just universal law. If you're not in alignment, things going to go left. And that is just part of what the Islamic faith and what she taught us, and that the Islamic faith was about. And her leadership showed that if African Islam was once rooted in gender justice, public scholarship, and spiritual empowerment. Understand how powerful that is. Gender justice, public scholarship, and spiritual empowerment. Her legacy teaches us that that's what Islam truly and originally was about. And honestly, what many things that we even navigate through today should be about. How do we apply that wisdom as medicine in our lives today? Reclaim your faith as a tool of liberation and not restriction, whatever your faith is. This is why education and scholarship and literacy is so important. It is not enough to just go to church every Sunday and sit and listen what the pastor says about that one verse, hear his translations, or hopefully her translations of what that's about, and then go about your week. You need to go deeper. And it's beyond simply reading the Bible. And I'm going in specifically with Christianity because that is the prevalence of what our people practice. If it's Islam, if it's somehow Judaism, whatever you practice. And again, African spirituality, reading, understanding, critical thinking, researching, having discussions with other people, going further to broaden your mind and understand what it actually is. Because I can tell you, one of the keys of your own spirituality is that no two people are necessarily going to interpret the same spiritual text in the same way. Your spirituality is a very personal path. So that means you got to do the work. So that means you got to learn. That means you got to do the scholarship. You got to do the reading. You got to dig a little deeper. But reclaim your faith and reclaim your spirituality so that you can go forward and challenge these narratives that disconnect faith from freedom. For example, this idea that in order to be spiritual, you can't question the spirituality. You can't question what you've read in the Bible, or you can't question what the Odu is actually talking about. True spirituality and reclaiming your faith means you get to question everything and keep questioning it until your soul and spirit is sufficiently satisfied with the answer, until it makes sense to you. make it make sense. You got to keep going until it does. And this medicine is also about restoring the legacy of women as teachers, guides, and protectors of sacred knowledge. We already are. We already do that, but we've forgotten that that is what we do and have deferred oftentimes to other groups, to other people, to men to be those keepers for us. But at the end of the day, it still is us. If we can stand in that power and reclaim that, the things that we can do, the things that we can be, the freedoms and the liberties and the progress that we can make for our families, communities, and humanity when we stand in the leadership that we naturally hold. And no one says overpowering masculinity or men. If we're going to just look at this as a binary, it's about standing in the fullness of who we are. And part of that medicine is also sharing stories that heal that rift, whether it's the rift between spirituality and social justice, because the two do go hand in hand. We have a lot of things that are happening in the world today, and very few spiritual leaders speaking up. There's a lot of spiritual bypassing happening. We're just going to think about the future or we're going to rise above it. When in reality, and again, if you go back and look at or listen to the ancestral activation series that I did during Black History Month, almost everyone who fought for the liberties and the freedoms and the advancements that we have as Black people today did so because it was a divine calling. They did so based on the concept of spirituality and faith, and God telling them, no, this is not what I want for you. This is not right for you. Get free. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the essential of it. So this idea that the two can exist is false. And that's part of how we play this forward and how we apply the medicine from the wisdom from Nana Asma'u that she has left for us is to reclaim all of that and look at the times that we are in 2025. If you are of the belief that I am of that we chose to be here at this time. We chose to be alive during this time when there is a shit show going on globally, and the epicenter of that shit show for right now, in this iteration of the shit show, is the United States. So to be here in the United States and be connected to this global historical ancestral legacy of resilience, excellence, and social justice means that there's a reason why you chose to be here during this time. There's something that you have to offer to help us move forward that can only be offered, that you can only bring forward when you can stand in your complete and total truth. That's your work to do. That's your job to do, to shed all of the stuff and to be who you are and share these stories because spirituality and social justice belong together. And another piece of wisdom that she has brought us is this idea, and again, the words of Black women carry the future. Listen to Black women. So we have to write, we have to recite, and we have to remember. So remember that her teachers that she trained, the Yan Taru, she wrote, they all recited, and the teachers, as well as herself, she remembered her own stuff, had to remember. That was part of their training as teachers. And that is part of the wisdom that she leaves for us is that we have to document ourselves, which leads to what that medicine is. How do we apply that today? The medicine from her wisdom is that your voice is an archive. Think about what I just said a moment ago. If you believe in reincarnation and the idea of choice and free will, even before you're born into this body, you chose to be here at this time with all of the things happening in the world today. Part of that is so that your voice can be present when needed. Senator Cory Booker just talked for 25 hours. I think it was 25 hours and 4 minutes. 25 hours and some change. At this point, it doesn't even matter. I mean, the change is going to matter in the future if somebody try to break that record. But he talked for 25 hours. No water, no food, didn't even go to the bathroom. I wondered if he had on a Depends, but I'm just saying He fasted for a couple of days and drunk no water the day before, so he was ready to do the things. Dude chose to be here at this time so his voice could be heard spiritually. You chose to be here at this time because your voice is an archive. It is meant to be heard. And you need to build it with care and pass it on. Build your voice. Build what it is that you have to say. Now, that's why it needs to go in this order, right? Educate yourself. Understand that your education and your literacy is a sacred act of resilience and resistance. So that when you speak, when you use your voice, you're speaking from a deep, deep well of wisdom and knowledge, and not just some reiterating some frivolous shit you saw on social media. Your voice is important. The true, authentic, developed, educated, and educated does not mean degree. Educated means what it says, educated, knowledgeable, wisdom, know some things that are true, and sharing that with other people. Even if the other people are your children or your auntie, uncles in them. Everybody is not meant to, lead a political party. Be who you are here to be and share the wisdom that you are here to share. And understand that you are dope. And I'm talking to Black women. If you are not a Black woman and you're listening to this, and I have to say this. Well, I don't have to say it, but I'm choosing to say it. Because Black women are dope, because we are the mothers of creation, the original woman. And I'll share some posts about that Eve gene, the woman who birthed humanity was a Black woman. So all Black women are connected to her in this unbroken chain. We all have access to every powerful, dope ass Black woman that came before us, whether it's within our bloodline or not, because technically it's all in our bloodline. Remembering who you are, remember who the fuck you are, which is the name of my latest book, activity book for Black women, is so critical. And I named the book that, and it's been a mantra of mine internally for a few years now because that's the message that I got. That's the message that I received, that I needed to remember who the fuck I am. And it is a constant daily activity to do that because we live in a world that wants Black women not to know who they are, that wants and has virtually succeeded in others not knowing who we are and not respecting who we are. But I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about Black women. Because to me, if you can remember who you are, just like if I can remember who I am, we are unstoppable. Unstoppable in a way that's not about dominating others, but that is about healing and bringing humanity back to humanity, bringing love back to the planet. True, divine, unadulterated, agape, all the different forms and versions of love, bringing all of that back to the planet, bringing empathy back to the planet, starting with yourself, starting with knowing how dope you are, knowing how lovable you are, how powerful you are, how beautiful you are. That's what I wish for you as I pray and wish for it for myself every single day. So, with that, I hope you learned a few things today. I hope we pass this tradition of Nana Asma'u forward a little bit today so that you can continue to go forward and dig in deeper and learn some more. And we'll be back next week, 6 p.m. Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, to share more about another Black woman who is dope as fuck. And until then, take good care of you.